all the folks that from Shopify on my team and beyond that helped to work on this. You're making their dreams come true as well. So yeah, I feel like we need to have that like Hall & Oates song now, the "You Make My Dreams Come True" song. No Hall & Oates fans out there? There we go. Yeah, I know Kathleen would like Hall & Oates. She likes all the good music. You like The Cure, right? Yeah, that's right. Amy, you like The Cure? Okay, cool. Yeah, we should talk about this more. This is good. This is good stuff. Music. All right, here we go. All right, I'm going to just turn it over to to Dana, who is the director of knowledge management at Shopify. She's going to say a couple of words just to greet you all. So let's hear it for Dana.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to welcome you all here to Shopify. I did put deodorant on this morning in case you wanted to come closer. No, you don't believe me? That's okay. That's fine. We have been huge fans of the Write the Docs organization for a very long time, so absolutely ecstatic to have you all here. This is such a wonderful community, so being able to share our space with this community is incredibly meaningful to us. Like Andrew said, you're making all our dreams come true, so I hope that you've already made some really great connections, and there'll be some time afterwards to chat and make more connections, so really make the most of it, and just once again, so happy to have you here. And I'll turn it back over to Andrew for all the housekeeping items. Thank you.
Woohoo! I feel like you guys are probably like, okay, can you just get on with it already? Like, talk about something, about docs. This is like the part where they're like, don't forget to follow me on YouTube and, subscribe and press the little like button so you can get notifications every day, and follow me on Twitter. And all right, what's happening here? Okay, food. So yeah, we've done that part already. Okay, good job, Andrew. That was a good start. Photos. I'm the only one taking photos so far, but yeah, feel free to take as many photos as you want. You can use some of these hashtags there if you'd like, and we can show everyone in the broader Write the Docs world how cool we are here in Ottawa. If you want to get on the Wi-Fi, we has it. It's welcome to Shopify, and it's the guest network. And I'm sure you already know where the bathrooms are. They're over there in the back. And there's a mic. I think Amy's got the mic over there. So after the talks, we'll open it up for questions, or you can just come up and chat with us after, if you don't feel comfortable asking a question from the crowd. Alrighty. Why do I love Write the Docs? Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I just read something about public speaking and how if you say a lot, it makes you come off like you're not really, you're not with it. So I feel like I'm gonna go in for some public speaking training so that I can eliminate saying But no, tonight I'm gonna do it a lot. I'm gonna just say tonight, get it out of my system. I wasn't even planned. That just happened. But it's like every time you change the slide, right? It's like Write the Docs. So I'm up there somewhere. This is the picture from 2018, and I believe that the picture from 2017, I'm in a similar location and also similarly obscure. No, there I am. That's me right there. It's totally me right there. That guy. Matthew, you must be in there somewhere, eh? I'm on this side? Oh yeah, is that you there? I don't know, somehow it looks like you, but no, now that I see a little clearly, I don't think it is you, but Matthew was there. There's another slide on here that you're in, I know for sure. Yeah, this is you, right? Yeah, that's Matthew. There you go, okay, cool. So, social proof. Yeah. Okay, don't say when you change the slide. I did it. Inclusivity. This is another part of the reason why we love Write the Docs so much at Shopify. Yeah, we consider everyone who cares about communication, documentation, to be a member of the community. This can be programmers, tech writers, developer advocates, customer support. That's what I love about going to the Write the Docs conferences. You get all these different folks, all these different viewpoints, and that's what's kind of cool about tonight so far, getting a chance to meet some of you guys face to face and talk about the different roles that you're in and the different experiences that you're having. We can learn a lot from that. So one of the things that I love about going to the conference in Portland is the pack manning. This is something that Eric Holscher, I believe, came up with, which is that if you see people kind of in like a little group and you're chatting and there's somebody that's on the outside that doesn't really have a group, Pac-Man sort of makes some space for that person to join into the group. I think that's really powerful stuff. And so I love that. And also just a little anecdote about care, which is so important to be careful of one another. When I was volunteering this year, we had two colors of lanyards. You had the black lanyard for everyone that wanted to have their photos taken, and a purple lanyard if you weren't comfortable with having your photo taken and posted online. So I should have taken a page out of that book tonight before I started snapping everyone's photos. But let me know if you don't want to show up online. Otherwise, I'll be tweeting it and Instagramming it. So yeah, care and inclusion. That's what we love. And also, just on a personal note, for me, finding Write the Docs has kind of been a bit like finding my tribe. And every year I get to go down to Portland and hang out with these lovable nerds, of which myself included. It's a great time for me. So I think part of finding your tribe is finding that thing that you're kind of willing to devote some of your time to outside of work. We all have busy lives and all kinds of stuff going on, but you guys made the time to come here tonight and be a part of this community, and I think that's saying a lot. So yeah, so thanks a lot for being here and being part of the Write the Docs community in Ottawa. Love it. If you're not on this already, you should really go there now and sign up. It's a good Slack channel to hang out on, and it's a way that you can kind of hang out with people all year long in between the conferences. All right. This is like a little like behind the curtain moment, like Alice in Wonderland. Is that the one with like the Tin Man? And at the end, it was just like a little guy behind the curtain. So this is like what I was like when I first started at Shopify. I was like, oh, dear Lord, what am I doing? Let's say you're a technical writer with some API experience, and you start out at a company with an API that's been around for a few years. It's been written by a multitude of developers and other stakeholders, and seems to include a smorgasbord of different writing styles, tone, and content. And let's say you need to jump right into a pretty cluttered issue repo and start fixing problems and contributing to the docs, basically on day one. And let's say that this company is called Shopify. And let's say that this technical writer is me. It's me. I am Sherlock Holmes. In all seriousness, though, you might feel a little like Sherlock Holmes trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together when you've signed up to document an API. And on a side note, a smorgasbord is a type of Scandinavian meal originated in Sweden, served buffet style. And this is a good visual demonstration of what I think our API docs kind of looked like when we first embarked on our journey 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And this is maybe where we think they've gotten to after we applied our style guide. Right, Rory? Okay, we got the thumbs up from Rory, so okay. That's the end of my talk. Thanks very much for coming out. We think we did a pretty good job. It's pretty tasty stuff. All right. Okay, so problem number 1. This is from Josh Brown. You can come talk to me if you want to hear the anecdote about us in San Francisco last year. And we split a bottle of sake, and then there was a flight from San Francisco to Ottawa that I was on. Anyway, I digress. So there's some weird stuff happening in the API reference sidebar. Some of the resources are camel case without spaces, others are in sentence case with spaces, and some are in between. 2 of them are plural, order risks and abandoned checkouts, and the rest are singular, the name of one resource is cut off. So, yeah, that's not so good. What's with that wonky sidebar? So at first glance, I thought that this would be like an issue that I could kind of just tackle like any other. I would go in, I would do some research, I would figure out what was going on with the inconsistencies in the sidebar, with the resource naming of the APIs, and I would just tackle everything and clean it up, and we'd be off to the races. But that didn't end up being the case. Why is that? Well, it turns out that resource naming for REST APIs is hard, and that the naming of those things, those resources, which are like the core things of the API, it impacts how you're going to write about the entire API. So figuring out the sidebar was basically the equivalent of figuring out all the docs. And what are resources even? Right, so just a little quick aside. This is basically, with a REST API, it's a way of manipulating data in an API. And those resources are available on endpoints, HTTP endpoints, and you can interact with them. So they're basically the stuff of the API. Without the resources, there's no API. Another reason why it was a challenge was that we had to kind of dive into the whole topic of case conventions, because the resources and the ways they were named was all based on upper camel case. And at first glance, I thought, well, we'll just make them all upper camel case and we'll be fine. But on further study, there turned out to be some additional complexities involved with that. So these are some of the issues that I encountered based on the issue of resources and casing. So first of all, in REST, which is basically a collection of best practices about APIs, it's best practices to give your endpoints a plural name, like orders with an S at the end. And this is because they represent a collection of those things. But you don't refer to the resource itself as being the plural version of itself. You would just refer to the order resource. So this created some complexity in terms of when should I call it order versus orders, and this can be a problem when you're trying to write about an API, and you're talking about, should we call it the resource feedback API or the resource feedbacks API, or should we talk about price rule objects or price rules with an S? Is that okay? These were all kinds of questions that started coming into my mind. And then the whole issue of sub-resourcing was something that ended up being a real can of worms. That was one of the things that Josh mentioned, was about some of them have spaces and some of them don't. What's with that? And so I looked into it, and it turns out that sub-resourcing and hierarchy in APIs is a super common way of organizing sidebars and organizing documentation for APIs. So here's MailChimp. You can see that they have automation emails, and so they nest emails under automation. So this is an example of finding some way of demarcating between sort of the parent resource and the child resource. eBay also does this. They have an inventory item resource, and then there's a sub-resource, which is product compatibility. And you can see the actual HTTP paths where you would access those resources, where you have an inventory item, and then you have some kind of way of identifying that, and then some kind of a child resource. Etsy, similar situation, payments, adjustments, payment adjustment ID. Magento, we try to do research into the space that we're in. So that's a competitor of ours, with their bundle product link management. So I figured, okay, we'll just find some way to indicate across the board when something is a parent resource and when something is a child resource. And so going back to what Josh was talking about in that issue, that those spaces were what indicated that. So at Shopify we have products, and you can have images that are associated to products, you can have variants that are associated to products. So we would put a space, and that way people could look there and they could find some way to sanely understand that there isn't an actual resource in the API called product image. There is a product, and then there is an image which is associated to a product. So I figured that this was going to be the way forward for me, and I was really excited and happy. And then I realized that it wasn't so simple. So this is an example of price rules. And when we create price rules in the Shopify API, you can create a price rule, which is essentially a set of conditions for how these rules are going to generate discount codes. And so the discount codes seem to be like a child resource of a price rule. And then you can see that you can actually get a discount code directly from the shop path, from the admin. So that made it a little bit difficult for me to say that this was the hard and fast structure of the API, and that I could feel confident that we would go into the sidebar and call a discount code a price rule space discount code. So that kind of gave me pause there. And the other thing that we discovered was that sometimes you will expose a resource that can actually apply to multiple resources in your API. So a new API, relatively new API at Shopify is the Resource Feedback API. We originally shipped this as a resource feedback that would be applied at the shop level. So basically at the root of the API, at the /admin. And then a little bit later, the team came to us again and said, well, now we're going to ship docs for product resource feedback. So I thought, well, I'll go with this, product space resource feedback. I mean, it just looks bad in the left navigation, you know, there's just something about it that I don't like. And it turned out that there was already another resource in our API called metafields that applied to maybe not all of the resources in Shopify, but a great many of the resources. And this is the way that the metafields resource was documented. So you can get all your metafields at the admin path. You can filter them. You can create metafields on a product, and you can do a few other RESTful things like updating a metafield or deleting a metafield. And this is essentially the set of examples that defines this API in our documentation. And so you can notice that they decided to use a specific resource, which is a product, and show how you can create a metafield and attach it to a product, but not show every single other resource. Like you could list that, there is a list. Metafields can apply to all of these resources, but we're not going to put an individual entry in our sidebar for every single resource that a metafield can apply to. So as it turned out for product resource feedback, this rule that I was trying to create for us that we could put in our style guide, it just was not appropriate in this instance. So it became kind of difficult to apply hard and fast rules that you could use as the basis for a style guide. And then the plot continued to thicken, which is that there's other kinds of considerations about how you might want to organize your endpoints, and they don't necessarily map on a one-to-one basis with how the API was architected and how developers think about the API. There's other stakeholders involved, folks from product marketing, or just there's basically domain areas as well. Like, what's the business domain, right? Shopify is in e-commerce, so we have a set of APIs that apply to sales channels. There's nothing in the actual HTTP endpoints themselves that indicates that those things only apply to sales channels, but conceptually and from a business use case scenario, that's the set of APIs. And you know, as a group of extended stakeholders that talk about the APIs and market the APIs and document the APIs, it was decided that it's going to make more sense to talk about those within the context of sales channel. So that's also something that's informing the left navigation. And a lot of that relates to what I refer to as the product marketing considerations. So even internally at Shopify, when we're creating new APIs and starting to work on documenting them, we don't go around talking about like, hey, are you working on the product space resource feedback API today? It's like, hey, are you working on the resource feedbacks API? And so this stuff gets used like again and again, you know, like, hey, are you working on the draft orders API? So there's different kind of lenses on this, and there's different inputs that are going to inform how you're going to present your documentation. So so what did work? What did work for us? Well, there was a few things that we thought we could stake a claim on. we like using upper camel case when we're talking about objects and resources. So if there is like specifically a thing in the API and it's a resource and its name is resource feedback, then yeah, use upper camel case for that, because this is a way that you can indicate that this is a thing, and it calls it out in the docs that it's a thing that you're going to have to interact with in the API. But like after that, maybe don't do that every single time you talk about resource feedbacks, because resource feedback, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, it's like a business concept. So if you're going to talk about more like what resource feedback is and how does it work and why would you even want to use it, then you don't need to necessarily be like hard and fast about always using your upper camel case, So we've basically decided, unless you're going to actually say the word resource or object, then don't really worry about being too hard and fast with that rule. Don't pluralize resource names when they're written in upper camel. So this is just confusing, because if you have a convention that we're going to talk about resources and use upper camel case, and then you put an S on the end, it makes the developer think, oh, there's an actual resource called price rules with an S, but there isn't. There's a resource called price rule, and it's like a collection of objects that are available at an endpoint in the API. Only use the word endpoint when referring to the HTTP path at which the resource is made available. So this might be a little, pedantic or something, but I find that there's so much sort of, I think because REST is kind of like a loose association of best practices or something, people get confused. Like, especially I found as a technical writer trying to get into APIs, I was like, well, what's the difference between a resource and an endpoint? Are those different things? And I'm not gonna get up in someone's face at a party about like resource versus endpoint or anything like that. But when I think about endpoints, I think about like locations on the web, like HTTP, like endpoints on the web that you can like hit. You can send a call. Like the call goes across the wire and hits the endpoint, and then maybe something comes back. Hopefully, right? If you're properly authenticated. The resource is more like the thing that is represented. It's the data that you're going to be interacting with. And so I think that's more appropriate to use for the most part. So sub-resourcing, even though I went down that whole rabbit hole with sub-resourcing and really freaked myself out, like it's still useful, right? We like humans were hardwired for hierarchy. We like to know that, oh, that's like the parent and that's like the child and that's how these things interrelate, and chapter 1, chapter 2, and side note, so we use it. We like when it's a clear-cut case where it's useful, then we do use that in our left navigation, and when we talk about the resources in the API, and then be like open and flexible about not being super wedded to your style guide rules in some cases, because there are other people that are involved in talking about APIs and marketing APIs and selling APIs and all this kind of stuff that also have a seat at the table. All right, we made it through problem 1. It's funny, like you're supposed to like organize a talk by like the problem, the solution, but you're probably not supposed to like be like problem and actually write the word problem on the slide. But I thought I would do that. So how's everybody doing? You got enough water? I'm not rambling incoherently up here. Does it feel like a story? Does it feel like a journey? Like a journey that I went on? Okay, it doesn't feel like this terribly dry, just sort of, we're so cool, look at all the things we've done. Okay, good, right. Right, so this is from one of the more recent Jurassic Park movies that I watched recently. And that's an Indominus Rex. That is not a real dinosaur, actually. Indominus Rex was a genetically modified dinosaur. But there are people on the internet that do these dinosaur versus things. So you can find out like who would win, Indominus Rex versus a T-Rex. And then he'd be like, well, I think there's an 80% chance. Well, 80% of the time Indominus Rex would beat T-Rex. Even though, so the T-Rex isn't actually a real dinosaur. T-Rex is a real dinosaur. Indominus Rex not a real dinosaur. Right. So what does this have to do with style guides? My son is 5 years old, okay? I'm doing my best up here, people. This is my lens on the world now, okay? It's all just dinosaurs and Paw Patrol. Okay, so the perils of not writing with a style guide. Don't do it. It will kill you. Definitely. So what happened with me is, in addition to getting that issue that Josh made about the sidebar being a whole, big problem, was that you get thrown in, right? You start at a job and you have to do the job. And so people are saying, hey, I got to document this thing, or here, there's this problem here, or blah, blah, blah. And you have to start writing stuff. And then you start getting into, like, actually writing stuff. And it's just funny how many little things keep cropping up. And you're like, how should I do that? Like, should I use code styling on that? Or should I start with an article? Like, should I always start with a the if I'm defining a property in a table? Or like an and, or maybe not. Maybe I should go with like a more like sparse style. And so you start Googling around and finding examples of the best API docs. Like you find Stripe. Everyone says, well, Stripe is the best. So you go on Stripe and you start doing what Stripe's doing. And then maybe next time, like the week after that, you got another issue you gotta solve. And someone's like, okay, you gotta solve this thing. And you start writing it and you're like, oh, how is Twilio doing this? I know they have good docs. So then you start doing it the Twilio way. And then maybe you check out Microsoft, or maybe you check out Box.com, or maybe you check, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, your own API docs are like a hodgepodge of all of these other great industry standard best practices. And so even though you've been doing your due diligence and doing your best, you have docs that are sort of, they kind of look untrustworthy, because it's like, I know, not to get, too, I don't know if pedantic is the right word, but like these little details, like maybe it's not going to be the make or break thing for a developer to be able to like code an app against your API, but like over time, if they keep coming back to the docs, they start to absorb this stuff and they start to notice like sometimes it's written this way, sometimes it's written that way, and it just it kind of undermines the confidence in the platform, especially with Shopify. If you're trying to like make your business writing apps for Shopify, you want to feel like the people that are running the platform, like it's not some crazy captain just like woohoo, out on the sea, like going towards an iceberg. So even though it does feel like a lot of little details, we all know, right, as tech writers, the devil's in the details. It's kind of our job to take care of the details. I just want to keep looking at this. It's so great. Sorry. Okay, so here's some quotes from our style guide. These are some examples of what I'm talking about. So like IDs. So we went with using ID all caps rather than ID or ID. See, there's a million ways you can do IDs. And in fact, depressingly enough, before we decided this, I went through our docs and we had all of those. We had every version of that. So yeah, pick one, and maybe and that's the thing. Every organization is different. Maybe you have a reason why you don't want to go with uppercase ID like we did, and maybe depending on what what kind of shop you are, what kind of code base is in your app, maybe there's reasons that come out of that. And so this isn't to knock on Box or any of these examples, because these are all docs that I took a lot of inspiration from over the years. But it's just written there like the ID, and then down there it's ID, and then in the title it's uppercase ID. And these types of things, they kind of add up. The and an. So when you're defining properties for an API, we decided to just always start with an article. Just a little decision that we made that required a whole ton of work. But it's little things like this, like one of them starts with a the, and the other ones don't. I don't know. It's not the end of the world, but I think it's just better to pick one. Pick one, write it down, make a decision, say this is how we're going to do it, and then you can just do it like that. It's nice. It's actually really liberating. Like, before I wrote the style guide, I was also like an API docs writer of one, basically, and then eventually, I talked with Rory, and I talked with my lead at the time, Therese. Like, maybe we should, because we have, merchant-facing docs, which has, I don't even know how many people are on merchant docs now these days? You know that one, Pat? 7? 10? Yeah, so 10 people on merchant docs and 1 on API docs. The math was a little off there somehow. But so we finally got some extra people on board, which was amazing. It was a great relief, but it was even more of a relief when we all aligned around a style guide that we could all write from. That was like the greatest thing ever. So here's one. This is maybe a controversial one. We decided to just go for Booleans, which are yes or no, basically on or off options in an API. We just went with like whether this is a product variant. So we even decided to do away with whether or not. We just went with whether this is a product variant because it's a Boolean. It can only be one of two things. The problem with not coming up with a decision about how you're going to handle Booleans is that people will describe Booleans a million different ways. And really, you shouldn't have to. It's just one or the other. So there's whether or not up there. Then there's has the value true if the object exists in live mode. Or, so it's all over the place. I thought I had a really good thought there, and then it just went away. Because I said, I interrupted my flow. So the thought, it came back to me. Okay, exciting. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be whether this is a product variant. Like, if there's more stuff that people need to know about the actual what's going to happen when I set this thing to yes, then by all means, write additional sentences that say, oh, and by the way, if this thing is on, then all this other chain, all these other chain effects are going to happen in your app. So be aware that if you turn this stuff on, this is what's going to happen. But a lot of the time, you don't need to have a super verbose description for Booleans. Valid values. This is another one. If you don't lock this thing down, people are going to come up with a million different ways to talk about what is your list of valid values. This is essentially for enums. So if you're defining a property that is an enumeration of values, just pick one. We went with valid values. Don't go with valid values are, or possible values, or all these other ones. Just find one and just go with it. So here's some examples, valid values or possible values. So to sum it up, writing without a style guide, it's a matter of trust. As I was saying earlier, it's important as documentarians that we take the details seriously and that we present like a uniform, well-cared-for surface for partners. This is going to build trust over time, and it will erode it over time if you don't do it. And then I put a little note here. What side do you want to be on? That's so silly. Okay, cool. I'm at 25 minutes. I was kind of nervous earlier because I asked Matthew. Matthew asked me. He's like, "How many slides you got, man?" And I was like, 47. He's like, I got 80 slides. I was like, oh man, because Matthew was saying, my talk's gonna be 15 minutes, and then he said, I got 80 slides. So I was kind of getting worried because the math was off. I'm like, well, if his is only 15 minutes and I got 47 slides, then something's not right there. But then I remembered Matthew's talk from Write the Docs in 2017. You're going to redo your talk? That'd be kind of cool, though, like a band that has their greatest hits. And people be like, 2017 talk! You're like, no, man, I just want to play the new stuff. Can't you understand? Exactly. Like Matthew's Write the Docs 27 talk is like the Freebird of API Docs talks. I'm so freebirding you when you get up here in a bit. So going to freebird you. I started a channel. We use Slack to communicate internally at Shopify. I started a channel called Dad Rock. So just, to put this into perspective, why is there a picture of Billy Joel on the previous slide? What's going on? I started the Dad Rock channel. Yeah. Okay. Problem number 3. I feel like after each one of these problems, we should just take like a stretching break or like a water break or something. I don't know, half an hour seems long, Like, my son does an hour-long ukulele class, and it's like forever. I mean, kudos to him, though, for duking it out for an hour on the ukulele. I wanted to just include some slides about GraphQL just because it's got a cool logo. It's like a science fiction alien spaceship logo or something. So in our case, we have APIs that are based on different technologies. So we have REST APIs and we have GraphQL APIs. So it turns out that if you're trying to write an API doc style guide, that if you have multiple technologies that your APIs are based on, you're going to have to take that into account. Because when you're documenting those APIs, they don't use the same words to mean the same things. So, like, rather than talking about resources in GraphQL, you always talk about types. Types are the thing in GraphQL. And also in GraphQL, you don't talk about like adding data or updating data. You talk about mutations. I don't know. I mean, that's just how you're supposed to do it. So you have to query the APIs, and you have to. So if you want to get some data or retrieve some data from GraphQL, you query it. That's straightforward enough. And if you want to change the state of some data in GraphQL, you have to mutate the data. So you got to use that word. And fields, yeah, in GraphQL is all about fields rather than properties or attributes. So just certain things that we have to be mindful as writers here at Shopify. If you're going to be learning how to do documentation for the GraphQL APIs, then you need something in the style guide that says don't use these other words that come from REST that you're probably familiar with. They hold no currency here. All right. Anyone? Quality music, right? all quality, every single one of them. One of the things that I love about Write the Docs is that people are so generous and say, well, here's how you should do stuff. And like I was talking to Matthew earlier about Neil Kaplan's talk, and I basically am just copying his talk in terms of like how we're going to run API docs at Shopify for the next 6 months, if I have anything to do with it. Kat King also gave a great talk about empathy in developer documentation, which I'm stealing. So I thought I would do my best in my own little way to come up with some kind of a playbook for coming up with an API doc style guide, if that's something that you have to do or something you have to do in the near future. So I would say research best practices. When I started diving in and trying to solve all the problems with the sidebar, I figured, well, what does Swagger have to say on this in their spec? What does API Blueprint have to say? It turns out that Swagger talks about properties. So when you're defining properties for an API, for resources, that's what you call them. You call them properties, and then they have types like integers and strings and whatnot. It turns out that API Blueprint calls those things attributes. So, definitely do your research into your best practices, but then at a certain point, you need to come up with your house style. This was like an aha moment for me was when Google published their documentation style guide. Right at the beginning, they were like, "This is, if it's useful to you, that's great. That's why we published it publicly. But this is like a description of our house style. This is what we've gotten behind." So rather than some people writing about properties and other people writing about attributes, decide what you're gonna go for. This guide isn't intended to provide an industry documentation standard, nor to compete with other well-known style guides. It's a description of our house style. Find examples of other style guides. So there's this really great resource called the API Style Book, which I think was started by Arnaud, who is the API known as the API Handyman. He's a really colorful character and super cool guy. And I learned a ton from this guy about Swagger and how the Swagger spec works. He's just also publishing a book right now about designing APIs, which is super cool. And you can go and check out the early access version of that. So learned a lot from him. And obviously, like other thought leaders in the space, like Google, they're kind of, in some ways, lighting the way. So no need to kind of no need to go it alone, really. Then kick the tires on the thing. So in our case, what we did is we I was really lucky. I got to work with 3 other tech writers, Rory and Tom and Ian, and we kicked the tires on the style guide. We put it into a Google Doc. It took us like 6 months or something until it was in relatively decent shape. And we opened it up and made it available to people as a resource, because we get pinged a lot in Slack from developers that want some guidance, or we get pinged on PRs to review PRs. And so check and see what the developers think of it, because if they're not going to get behind it, then chances are you did something wrong. They're the ones that are going to kind of champion this because they need it as much as you do. Everybody likes to have some like guidelines and rules of the roads. And then publish the thing. So we started off in Google Docs. I was mentioning we were going to put it. We were thinking of different places that we were going to put it. There's a few options. Ultimately, we decided on GitHub for the time being. That could change. For us, it was a question of audience. Our audience is, a lot of our audience is going to be internal developers at Shopify. They happen to like hang out in GitHub all the time because that's where their source code is. And also just for collaboration, like we're like a docs as code shop here. So like we're addicted to the pull request workflow for doing reviews and having a version history. It's like a wiki. Like that's like the baseline feature that you need. If you don't have like versioning in a wiki, like really good versioning, then it's too scary, because you can't have a page and then be like, did that change? Like, wasn't it different 2 weeks ago? You need to know like what were all the steps that marched you along the path to the current state. So, a big exciting motivational ending with our friend Benedict Cumberbatch. He's not impressed with me right now. Sorry, man. So, yeah, I guess when I started off, I would have thought that the path would be a little bit more clear and populated by all-knowing seers of API docs knowledge that would send me on my way, sure-footed, confident, and alive. I can't believe I wrote that. I feel like I could have come up with a better closing word in that list. But that wasn't really the case, I found. And there's nothing really wrong with that. Like, your job as the API docs writer is to care about this stuff. It's the developer's job to make sure the docs are technically accurate and that they actually work. And then beyond that, there's like all these other folks that are involved in selling the APIs, explaining the APIs, and loving the API docs. I think that's really our job as tech writers. So, yeah. It's important to me, These API docs are important to me. I care about them, so that's why I do it. So if you want to check out our stuff, you can go to developers.shopify.com, and here's some other resources from Arno and Google and things that you might find helpful. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you. So you can feel free to shoot some questions, and otherwise, if people are tired and you want to get some water or a snack or go to the bathroom, feel free. You can always just grab me later, but we can always take a few questions now if anybody has anything burning I'd like to say. Yes, sir. Amy's going to come bring you the mic so we can hear you.
Thanks. Just an observation with the IDs. If you use the capital I, capital D, and it sort of breaks your other standard with the class names. Now, it's not the same thing, but if you have, like, because it looks sort of like a camel case. You understand what I'm saying? Or
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, I was just an observation.
It's sort of like a generic way to refer to a thing's identifier.
Yeah.
So, like, all these things have these unique identifiers. So the ID itself is probably like product_ID or something. But sometimes when you're writing in the flow, you might want to specifically call out that the concept of the thing's ID rather than the ID itself, if that makes sense.
And with the sidebar, does the sidebar really need to be related to the actual structure of the API? Isn't it better just to have it completely functional, like actually focused on how the users would use it, and then you could have something like another resource, like a glossary, where it shows like a map of the actual structure of the API, and they can go and click on the different resources that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. So that was kind of what that was kind of like my discovery process through this, was that when I started working here, I looked at the sidebar, and it was informed by camel casing and the name of the resources. And then I started doing some research into other APIs. I'll just back up. And I found that was often the case. Wow, there's a lot of slides, eh? Holy cow. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Yeah, like if you look at Etsy's docs, the way that their resources are organized is by the structure of the URLs. So like payment, adjustment, item is the name of this page. And same with like eBay, like the way that their docs are structured. And this is like the most cleanest example, because that screenshot on the right is actually the left navigation of MailChimp's API docs. And you can see that it does map onto the actual structure of the URLs. But I think at this point I would have to agree with you. Like, don't get too wrapped up into that in terms of the information architecture of your site, because there's so many other stakeholders too that are going to want to call them different things, and naming things is like super hard.
Yeah.
So I definitely would agree with you there. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Well, folks, you, sir. Amy will bring the mic down for you.
I just wanted to say that we ran into this exact same problem, not specifically with APIs, but with trying to document a UI. When you're talking about a concept, like in this example, it was web filtering. But a web filter is also a singular item. But web filtering, capital W, capital F, is a feature. And web filtering, lowercase w, lowercase f, is the generic feature that everybody does, but not our specific one. And so there has to be, the trickiest part for us has been figuring out like what the delineation should be between 7 different variations on the words web filter for every possible sort of iteration: GUI, CLI, customer facing, internal facing. So it's just interesting to see basically the exact same journey that we've been going through.
Oh, that's cool. That's reassuring.
Yeah. It's pretty much exactly this. We run into all the exact same hurdles. So
I was worried that people were going to be like, "You're the only one that like had problems with that, man." Like,
definitely not.
Pretty self-explanatory, actually, buddy. No, that's really cool. Actually, I think there was a talk at Write the Docs 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Was it Ruthie that gave a talk on naming things is hard? And it was like such a cool talk. So I'm sure you can find that on YouTube. All the Write the Docs talks from the conference are like available on YouTube, and it's just like a fun thing to kind of like rabbit hole yourself into for an afternoon, especially if you have to give a talk in front of other tech writers. Alrighty. So if you guys want, we'll take a little break, and we won't have someone holding a mic talking at you for a few minutes, which you might find refreshing. And then Matthew will get up here and he'll do his talk. So thanks very much for listening. I appreciate it. Check, 1, 2. Alrighty, folks, we're just going to get Matthew's laptop powered up here, ready to go. Look at that. There it is. And then we're going to get rocking again with Matthew Buttler. So please, when you're ready, you can come back over here. So I was gonna do some like big introduction to Matthew and all his like accolades and achievements in the docs world, in the API docs space. But I figured, he's already a celebrity, so you guys probably already know about Matthew Buttler. You don't need to listen to me ramble on about him. And I think maybe some of you were part of the Write the Docs social events that Matthew was running for a while. Or you may have come across Matthew at Write the Docs conferences prior. in my case, my experience with Matthew was that he kind of took care of me and made sure I didn't get into any trouble in Portland this year. We happened, what's the word? Serendipitously. That is a big word. Serendipitously. It's like a spelling bee. Spell serendipitously. I couldn't do it. If I had to right now, I couldn't do it. We were staying at the same hotel, which is a really neat hotel called The Society in Portland. It's in Chinatown. So if you ever do make it to the conference, it's a cool place to stay. It's basically like a hipster hostel, I guess, right? But it's like fun. You can get your own room, but it's like, I guess it was a sailor hotel. It was a sailor hotel, and then they've kind of done it up, and it's got a really good rooftop terrace where you can take your drinks up there. The bartender makes his own custom cocktails, including maple syrup. And so when I told him I was from Canada and I live up in Wakefield, so I said, hey, I'm from the land of the maple syrup. He was very excited about that, so he made me his maple syrup drink. But yeah, Matthew came downstairs one morning for breakfast, and I said, oh man, I can't, every time I keep trying to download the Lyft app, it times out on my data. And he's like, just join the Wi-Fi, dummy. So that was that. And I think there was another time when after the Write the Docs party, you like programmed the address of the hotel into the phone, so I could just like follow it back to the hotel. So thank you, Matthew, for taking care of me in Portland this year. I really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Buttler.
You're welcome, Andrew. Hey guys, I'm Matthew Buttler. Apparently I'm famous. I'm going to be talking about documentation audits. This sounds really fascinating, I know. So let's get started. If I can get my thing to work. I know you folks have seen these kind of docs before. You know you've seen them. You may have written some. We all have those days. There might be 9 words. There might be 900 words. The point is they exist, and you don't know where they are. You hear about them, you fix them, and you repeat. And there's got to be a better way to tackle this, some way to get an overall sense of everything that needs the new version or the new screenshot or just plain wrong. But what can we do? So, hi folks, my name is Matthew Buttler, and I write documentation for a company called Signiant. We move big files fast over the internet for people like Fox, Disney, media companies like that. We're like not really a big deal, but we're a big deal in our own way, So this evening I'm going to talk to you about the wide, wonderful world of auditing documentation. Why you'd want to do one from time to time. What they do to help you out with your docs and what they provide, and how to build one up to use it to add some finesse to your dear old docs. So first up, why do you want to do this? Well, I like to think about documentation in a space. When working with a product documentation, you need to know where it all is. You have to find the space where it all is, not where it could be. I'm talking about the docs that are out there. I'm talking about the docs you've already shipped somewhere, and they've probably been seen by some eyeballs, and they're probably getting some traction. People are very enamored with your API docs, for example. But it's possible they're causing problems. The point is that these docs are out there, and you need to know about them. Knowing what's included in your documentation helps you avoid duplication, allows you to know where your deficits are, and identify the highest value targets you can deal with to provide the best possible experience for your end user. Be they customers, your customer service agents, or developers, or sysadmins, or whoever you happen to be talking to that day. So, documentation audits. What the heck do I mean by a documentation audit? This is totally something I've totally stolen from everyone else in my career, so credit where credit's due here. But, I think it's a really important thing to know about. So, it's a simple thing to really get yourself a hold of your documentation. An audit is a tool that you can use to know more about your documentation, and it gets you very acquainted with its contents. And trust me, with an audit, you'll generally more know about what's in your documentation set than some of your most seasoned support folks who rely on that from day to day, day in, day out, ad nauseum. So that sounds great, but why? Why does it matter? Well, audits are about getting a sense of what's out there. I said that before, but it's important to know what's out there. It's better to know what's out there because we all know that knowledge is power. And there's a lot of power in knowing what's out there and where everything is and how people use it and if people are using it at all. So it doesn't have to be that wide in scope. I'm certain that you've got a great big honkin' doc site there's probably at least one specific section that's in need of more attention than others. You'll know how to find it because it's probably causing support tickets. You can stop that exsanguination by changing a typo of can to can't, for example. Or, you get those feedback tickets that you get. People just can't take the hint, And then you get your sales guys or your marketing guys, and they come over and they say, hey. They come over to your desk and say, hey. Or they send you an email and they say, hey. Or they send you a Slack message and they say, hey. And they want you to do something that's easy to fix. So what? What does a documentation audit do for you? It asks a bunch of questions. So we have, what is out there? Where can I find it? Very, very important questions to know about your docs. Who is it for? Who finds it? Where does it fit in? Again, very important. Are people even reading it? The most important, because if they're not reading it, then you don't really have much work to do. And when was it last updated? And who are the SMEs? Who are the subject matter experts? So, is it correct? Is it useful? Is it in useful shape as well? That's another thing. Would your English teacher be proud of this doc that you've written painstakingly about how to ship product to China? Is it worth fixing? Does it still apply? Is it obsolete? Does it not even matter anymore? These things happen more than you might think. So that's a lot of questions, a lot of questions to ask. But luckily, there are spreadsheets. I never thought I'd be excited to talk about spreadsheets, but really, we can break this question down into column headings pretty easily. So here's a basic audit that I sort of built up for you guys this evening, just for example purposes as we go along, because it gives you good visualization. So here's some of the questions I just posed. So what is out there? Where can it be found? What exists? You're asking this question because once you look at what exists in your stack, you know what you're looking at. It's like revealing the monster in the movie, and you get to see the whole thing. What was it? The Fictitiosaurus? Andominus Rex. Again, you get to see the Andominus Rex the first time. You get to see the whole, every single ugly scale of that beast. So you also get to know if you have too many documents or too few documents. And honestly, folks, I've been through a few knowledge centers, and it's typically both. So I've laid out some basic tombstone data here. So we've got what the article is called, so introducing the plugin, for example, where it is located in my stack here, so topic, article 1, great IA, I think. And where it's in your support center, where it's in your doc site, wherever. So customers looking for this information, the support's looking for this information, and now you too are looking for this information. You can probably find the URL of the web docs, and if not, I'm sure there's a place to find some kind of unique identifier to link in to this doc that you might have. So that's good. The key thing is here, though, log the URL. In more non-traditional settings, you might find that your sales guys have generated their own PDFs because they don't trust the docs for some reason. You can probably get these PDFs by asking. It's really important to get them, but make sure you get their PDFs that they're using to augment your good docs with what they think are better docs. But we all know about those sales guys, don't we? Anyway, attach that doc, use that doc to make your docs better. So who is this doc for? Who finds it? Why do they find it? What do humans do with it? The question we're driving at here is who is the target audience of the doc? Who is going to read this? Is it for absolute novices? Is it for a technical, non-technical audience? Here I've broken down few delineations. We've got novice users, we've got intermediate users, we've got sysadmins, we've got API developers, and we've got marketers, those marketers. They need stuff too, So this is useful information to have because sometimes our audience needs a bit more hand-holding, especially if your branding has that sort of squishy factor where you want to be like, oh, it's so great of you to use our application. We're so happy you're here. Here's our documentation, and we'll teach you how to do the thing from start to finish, Some customers need hand-holding. Other guys are like your sysadmins who just want like a list of servers that they want to look at so they can know how to type in the thing to do the thing that they want to do. They don't really care about hand-holding. They just want the information, right? Right. So something to consider here as well is how does this relate to the way your UX team or department or whoever sees your company? And UX can be a useful asset when deconstructing your documentation to this overall outlook. You can start asking them questions like, what can we assume about the user at this point of using the product? What does research tell us about this pain point? Is it even worth documenting? Where does this doc line up in terms of business goals and business value for your product? These typically give you a sense of what to prioritize and how to find some of the lowest hanging fruit and fast wins. So at the end of the day, you should be able to justify the existence of a documentation set in terms of the value it adds to your overall documentation set. If you can't justify it, that might be an indicator you should mark it for removal, which is often the case. So are people reading it? What does engagement look like? I took the easy way out and gave engagement a letter grade here because I couldn't think of any useful metrics to give you, but a lot of it's just simply raw data you can get from Google Analytics and seeing traffic patterns, what people can see on your site, what they're viewing, how long they're staying on the page, the bounce rate, that type of stuff. It's important to consider the impact you might have by altering something on a page as well. If the page is getting, like, say, for example, thousands of hits a week and it's not generating support tickets or bad feedback, you probably don't really need to mess with it too much. And you can drive this even further by looking at on-screen activity using tools like InspectLit and Hotjar, which will give you a nice heat map of where people are, focusing their mouse and what they're looking at and what they're highlighting, what they're copying, what they're pasting, what they're going back to over and over again. And of course, there's good old-fashioned feedback tools as well. So, lastly, we want to talk about subject matter experts. So who are these subject matter experts? Who can we team up with to make sure the thing gets the visibility they want? The documentation they need, because that's really what everybody wants. In fact, this is a bit of an aside, but last year's open source survey had this entire section stating, and I quote directly, documentation is highly valued, but often overlooked. Right? Incomplete or outdated documentation is a pervasive problem observed by 93% of respondents to the survey, yet 60% of contributors to open source product say they never or rarely contribute to documentation. Like, how wild is that? Like, people love docs, but no one's willing to write them. It's crazy. People actually are very interested in knowing what the state of their docs are. They're just not willing to write them. So, now with this information, what do we know? We know what's there, how correct it is, and whether it's serving its purpose well, ideally. So, big question is, you have the answer to the question, is it worth fixing? You have the total sense of this doc and whether or not it's obsolete or not, because you talk to a subject matter expert, you reviewed engagement, you see what things are like. Does this doc help people do something at all? If not, maybe it's time to do the incredible magic of cleaning up and thank it for its service and then throw it into the fire. So be merciless, though. Like, be able to restore it. And removal is a strong word, I know, but it's not necessarily about just simply deleting a doc. It's about hiding it, making it unavailable for a while until it's requested again. Then maybe you might think about turning it back on. Maybe you think about revising it. Maybe it's the type of thing you really want to do. Maybe it's worth the effort, But overall, be merciless. So I've shown you a complete audit, but how do you build one? So this is really quick, easy. It's actually easier than you think. So first, get a list of the articles. Get a list of all the articles. There are two ways to do this. You can either get someone else to do it or do it yourself. The advantage of getting someone else to do it is that assembling a spreadsheet can be pretty, let's face it, mind-numbing. If you're freelancing, which is something some of you might be, the practical tip here is that you don't want to do this grunt work yourself. You'd rather get someone in the organization to do it for you because they have access to everything. They will know exactly what is included in the knowledge base because they work there, right? If you're freelancing, you're probably just walking in from a smoky, dusty trail and showing up and saying, I would like a list of your articles. And they will probably say, yes, of course, no problem. Now, you can also do it yourself, which is something actually I prefer to do, because if you're using a SaaS like Zendesk or WordPress or something, you usually poke an API and get the list of the articles and where they exist and that kind of stuff. I just happen to find it easier that way. I like to do it myself, but your mileage may vary. But we've got our first couple questions answered. What is out there? Where is it? Where can I find it? So next is best to figure out your subject matter experts. I know it's the last column on the spreadsheet, but it's good to get them first, because they can often provide a lot of the context for the article and give you a bit of an understanding of the subject matter. Again, if you're walking in off the dusty plains and you're sort of showing up as a freelancer, they will tell you what the product does in detail because they're stoked about it. They can also provide valuable insight into whether or not the document is at all accurate or worth fixing. So ask them. Ask them directly. Who's this for? Who would find this? Why is it useful to find? Subject matter experts love to talk about the subject matter because, let's face it, they're experts, right? So then comes the hard part, looking at the data around the articles and looking at the articles themselves and putting everything together. This is why you make the big bucks. You're a set of eyeballs with a brain working for like a software company, and maybe they can give you the software to work with, but look at the articles, look at the context, look at how it looks from all the possible angles you can get. You start to identify the trends, deficit, and other things that need attention. And like I said before, what has the highest value? What are the easy fixes you can do to add value? What are your easy wins? More importantly, it really allows you to be more proactive in approaching your docs that need to be corrected. And often this is the case because docs get rotten, right? Right. So you start to see fewer support tickets, and often support tickets start to look like that. And the feedback takes a turn too, guys. Nasty feedback goes away. And lastly, you got, people come to your desk instead of saying, hey, this is easy. They say, hey, thanks for writing that doc. That's great. Send you a Slack message saying, that's great. Sparkle, thumbs up. Awesome. It's great. And they're going to be coming to you and trusting you to provide the valuable updates. So that's all I got for you guys today, folks. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. But like I said, 15 minutes of power, 89 slides, actually 74. So, yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. Any questions? No? Yes? Maybe? Yeah. No, never.
I want to pick your brain. Now, full disclosure, I'm totally planning on doing this. How do you have any ideas about like how you can kind of collect like the data on the changes that you're making and how the improvements are making a good impact and how you're leveling the docs up and how you would kind of track that in a scalable manner?
Typically what I'll do is I'll assign like JIRA tasks and tickets and that kind of thing. So I have sort of a paper trail with that. As well, I will communicate with the subject matter experts to let them know the changes are coming. And honestly, it comes down to just leaving a notes column for yourself in your audit to make sure that you know what you're keeping track of, what you're removing, that kind of stuff. So you can say, like, this was addressed in ticket PB7932, or this was removed on this date, this was reactivated this date, that type of stuff. It's about really doing a favor for yourself and keeping track of what you're doing.
And do you write for, sorry if I missed this part, but do you write for internal audience only or also for external customers?
Typically external customers, but I do have a bit of an internal commitment as well because I'm the only talk writer.
Oh, right. The lone wolf.
Yeah, man.
I know that well.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I'm wondering, okay, I can't hear myself. I'm wondering, I've been doing a bit of an audit for internal documents at a business, and I'm trying to get more feedback from the ops manager about what he would like to see in there. Do you have any strategies for picking their brains about what it is that they really want and need? Or is it something you just kind of start doing on your own and say, how do you like this?
Well, it's a little bit of that, but honestly, bring donuts. Bring beer. Bribe them. Like, documentation is not about morality, right? It's about getting the information. If you show up with a briefcase full of money for your boss who needs to give you some information, whatever works. It's really about being persistent and chasing people down and letting them know that there is value in what you're doing. That's the thing. Like, I joke a lot about bribing and morality and that kind of stuff, and I tell jokes, but really it's about being really persistent, not being afraid of developers, not being afraid of subject matter experts, and actually confronting them. And not confronting them, confronting sounds bad, but like showing up, being present, letting them know that you are interested in what they are doing, and they will probably be like, oh, someone's really interested in what I'm doing. That's great. Because they're vain. People are vain creatures. So if you appeal to them with donuts and bribes and show up and tell them how you're interested in the API or the this, that, the other thing, they're going to open up to you. If they don't, then go to their boss. Like, honestly, this is a bit totally off topic of what I was talking about, but a lot of the practice of documentation is really about showing up and being present and engaging people in the same language that they speak. So if you're noticing that your developers talk to each other kind of funny, try to figure out what they mean. Like, find someone on the inside who's willing to work as like a counterintelligence agent and give you hip you to the lingo. That's a very important thing. Because if you're talking about stakeholders, you're using your docs language and they're using developer language, they're going to not know what you're talking about. You're not going to know what they're talking about, and you're just having acronyms thrown back and forth. So, it's important to communicate on the same sort of planes as your people you are documenting for. That's a whole other talk in and of itself. Working counterintelligence documentation. Spy versus spy, yeah. All right, any other questions, guys? I'm going to start singing. If I leave you.
Thank you, sir. That was excellent. All right, so we'll just wrap things up here. It's just about 8 o'clock. I'm told meetups are supposed to be like around 2 hours. It's like a sweet spot. So we're going a little extra. But yeah, thanks again for being here. It means so much to me that you were here to make our dreams come true. We have a saying at Shopify, which is that, and maybe we're not the only ones that have this saying, but there is a saying: feedback is a gift. And we would love to hear some feedback from you guys about this night and what you got out of it and what went well. I mean, what didn't go so well. Because at the end of the day, this is your night. This is for your community. You're part of this community now. Haha, suckers. And the doors auto lock at 8 o'clock. So go. No, but yeah, if you love the Right the Dogs community, if you got something out of this, if you're enjoying it, we have channel of communication open now on the Meetup platform, so you can always just fire me a message, or you can post something there, and we'll collect your feedback. And so we have another one of these already on the books for July 31st. It's also a Tuesday night. And what we'd love it, is if we got a submission from somebody from the community outside of Shopify that wants to do a talk. So we will be sending out a message on the Meetup platform with a submission, probably like a Google form or something, where people can sign up and provide a topic for a talk. So that way we can hear from someone that's external to the Shopify community, and we also have a couple of folks that are going to do a talk, a couple of Shopifyers that are going to do a talk about Google Analytics and empathy for merchant docs. And we may even have a special surprise celebrity guest coming in from San Francisco, but that's fingers crossed, to be determined. So yeah, that's all I got for tonight. So thanks again for coming out. We'll see you again soon. And yeah, feel free to kick around and finish those carrot sticks.